It's been said that this century, the 21st century, is the century of Africa. People forecast very large growth rates over the next 30, 40, 50 years. The share of GDP coming from Africa is forecasted to go from 2.5% to 12% by 2050. So everybody is expecting great things to happen in Africa. Now the good news is that it can happen. The good news is that it can be done. The good news is that it can be done fast. It took Americans and Europeans 200 years. It took the Japanese over 100 years. It took the rest of Asia about 50 years. Now Africa can do it in less than one generation. Now that's the good news. The bad news is that this is not going to happen automatically. It is not certain that the miracle will occur. And it certainly is not going to be easy. It's not going to be automatic, and it's not going to be easy. And whether it happens or not depends crucially on the decisions that are made and will be made today. Now, I work at the World Economic Forum, where we estimate the competitiveness of 148 countries in the world. And Africa has been improving. Many African countries have been improving, but they are behind in many different areas. Let me mention of the hundreds of different things that we actually measure at the forum, let me highlight the 6 factors that I think are fundamental for this miracle to actually happen. Factor number 1, Africa needs to make an intelligent use of natural resources. Having natural resources is not enough. Africa has had natural resources for millions of years. And this wealth has not been properly used in the past. The wealth has been squandered in wars, in corruption. Wealth has disappeared from the country without leaving jobs, without creating additional wealth. This time around, Africa needs to stop consuming the wealth, using the wealth for current consumption, and start investing so that the natural resource wealth creates additional wealth in the future. Second, infrastructures. This is an infrastructure congress. Infrastructures are crucial. Infrastructures are important. The United States initiated its 19th century growth with the railroad system that links the East and the West Coast. The United States made another great leap forward in the 1950s with the interstate highway system. Infrastructures are very important. Infrastructures facilitate business. Infrastructures reduce the cost of transportation, the cost of communication. Infrastructures create new businesses, facilitate the exchange of ideas. But the fact that infrastructures are good doesn't mean that all infrastructures are good. Let me give you one example that it's close to where I come from. Spain. Spain prides itself of having an incredibly good infrastructure system. For many years, they built roads, they built airports, ports, railroads, high-speed trains. There was a boom. Hundreds of thousands, millions of jobs were created in order to build all of these infrastructures. An infrastructure bubble appeared. And then the bubble bursted. And now Spain is full of trains without passengers, airports without planes, roads without cars. The goal of the infrastructures is not to create jobs. We had a session this morning. How many jobs do we create here? How many jobs do we create there? That's not the goal. The goal is to create wealth once the infrastructure has been completed. And therefore, having infrastructures for the sake of it, much like Spain did, is not a good idea. Infrastructures should be prioritized. We should choose infrastructures that have a wide range of benefits. The government shouldn't choose one sector and then build the infrastructure so that can sector benefit. The infrastructures that are useful are the ones that benefit many potential sectors. Some exist, some don't exist. Infrastructures that are good are infrastructures that are flexible, infrastructures that are durable, that resist the passage of time, that do not depreciate with weather. Infrastructures that create networks, networks of businesses, networks of people, networks of cities, networks of countries, networks of regions. Infrastructures that solve bottlenecks. When there is chaos, where there is an existing demand, the infrastructure satisfies the demand. It solves the bottleneck. Again, the beauty of infrastructures is not that they create jobs while they are built. The beauty of infrastructures is what they leave behind after they have been finished. 3, enlarge markets. Many people have discussed this morning, Africa is not a market. Africa has 700 million people. It's expected to have 1.5 billion people by the end of the century. But if these people are separated by borders, if every time you have to cross a border you need complicated visas, complicated permits, if you need 54 cellular phones to move around Africa instead of one, you have a problem. Of course, uniting Africa means infrastructures. Infrastructures that are thought from an African perspective, like the interstate highway system in the United States. But it's more than that. It means reducing bureaucratic barriers. It means freedom of mobility of people, facilitate migration, facilitate the movement of talent. If you don't have talent from abroad, you're not going to succeed. 4, an efficient government. Governments should not create wealth. The role of government is not to create jobs. The role of government is not to be the big employer for friends and relatives and political friends. Governments should serve the people. Government should create the environment so that the private business creates jobs. So the private citizens with good ideas can implement their ideas, create wealth, create jobs, and create growth. No matter how many infrastructures you have, ports are going to be useless if it takes weeks to get the containers out of the ports. Roads are useless if it takes hours or days to cross a border. Railroads are useless if it's costly to move goods across borders. And therefore, the government should facilitate, the role of the government should be to facilitate the use of these infrastructures. We tend to focus too much when we talk about democracy, and many African countries are democratic for the first time in history now, which we should applaud. But democracy is not just the government by the people. A democracy is a government by the people, for the people. And we should pay more attention to this second part. 5, we should embrace technology. We should not create technology, but the technology that exists, we should embrace it, we should use it. Telecommunication is very important. Africa, many African countries now have more than one cellular phone per person. Unfortunately, many of these cellular phones do not operate at the speed that is sufficient to the modern world. The internet does not arrive everywhere. High-speed internet does not exist everywhere. Smartphones do not exist everywhere. We're having difficulty even here to get our emails or to go to the internet. So one of the key infrastructures, when we think about infrastructure, one of the key infrastructure is high internet, high speed, high access to the information around the world. And six, the most important of all infrastructures, the mother of all infrastructures, education. The West, the United States, Europe, could not have grown in the 19th and 20th centuries without investment in education. In the early 20th century, the best universities in the world were in Europe. At the end of the 20th century, the best universities in the world are in the United States. Now, some of the best universities in the world are starting to be in Asia. The Asian miracle could not be understood, cannot possibly be understood without education. The massive efforts of countries like China, Korea, to invest in the education of its children are at the heart of their economic miracles. And therefore, when we think of infrastructures, the key infrastructure is human capital. Every school in Africa should have access to high-speed internet so that the students don't miss on the education revolution that is being played today. There is a huge debate around the world on how to change the education system, how the internet impacts education in the United States, in Europe, in Asia. There is a big debate. Classrooms are being transformed everywhere. At Columbia University, where I teach, how are the massive online courses going to affect my job? There's going to be 5 or 6 or 20 superstar teachers who have millions of students. And that's going to change the way I teach my classes at Columbia. African children should not miss on this opportunity. If Africa misses this education revolution, the growth will have to be postponed for another generation. But when I say education, I don't mean more of the same education. The technological revolution that we live today is very different from past technological revolutions. So in the past, the jobs, the manufacturing jobs that started in England, and then they moved to South Europe and North America, and then moved to Asia, those jobs, in all probability, will not come to Africa. It's not that Africa is next in this, movement of manufacturing jobs around the world, because these jobs will disappear. Machines will make them disappear. And therefore, educating our children in the old education system is a bad idea. We need to educate our children, we need to educate African children with the next generation of education, which emphasizes things that machines cannot do. For example, creativity. Machines can do calculations, machines can do physical things much faster and much better than humans can do, but machines cannot create. So we need to empower the African children with their ability to come up with their own ideas, to implement their own ideas, to create their own businesses, to allow them to make their own businesses grow, and that's how Africa will grow in the future. You should not hope for the low-wage skilled jobs that have moved around the world over the last 2 centuries. They will not come here. They will disappear. And therefore, and this is my last point, while we talk about infrastructures, while we talk about the future growth of Africa, we should keep in mind that the key to develop Africa, just like the key to educating Asia in the past century, and the key to making Europe grow and the United States grow in the past century, the key is education. Now, in 1960, the President of the United States, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, made a famous speech. He said, "We, the United States, will send a man to the moon and bring him back safely before the decade is over." I wish that some African leader made a similar speech, but instead of sending a man to the moon, should commit himself and the entire African continent to have, before the decade is over, the best education system of the world. It is not a matter of money. It's only a matter of political will. Thank you very much.